Well, hi everyone, thank you for joining me. If you've got any questions, please do send them in. I've got someone who's going to ping them to me on a laptop here and I'll answer them as quickly as I can. Just to give you a bit of geography of where we are, we're on the bridge at the moment. The pilot and the captain are forward, or I should say facing towards the bow. I get trouble I call it the front. They're just over there steering the ship. So if you've got any questions, they can be about the ship, they can be about climate change, they can be about Antarctica, the wildlife, absolutely anything. Do ping them in. I'm keeping an eye on the messages here, and hopefully they should land any moment now. It's been an incredible 3 weeks actually. Mike and I have been down here. We've been amazed. We were worried that it was going to be so dark because it's polar winter, but we have had pretty decent light, with the exception of today, where it is, I'm not sure you can see behind me, a little bit bleak and overcast at the moment. And we are, as I said in the programme, just heading towards Elephant Island. Right, questions coming in from here, from TC. Do you think, since living on the ship, you've raised awareness of how serious the issues are? I don't know. I mean, I hope so. Our job as reporters is to report on what we see and what we find, and you kind of need to go there to see it for yourself and then to try and show people at home. It's a real privilege for me to be on this ship, and so the most that Mike and I can do is to try and convey what the really bright scientists are telling us and what Mother Nature is telling us out the window. So it's really hard to know whether it makes a difference or not. I just hope that we can inform people and they can make their own decisions. We're not here to preach or anything along those lines. It's just about sharing stories with people sat at home, because, as I said, I'm very aware that we are really lucky to be here. It's a continent 1.5 times the size of Europe, and yet there's only 600 people here at the moment, so it's a really rare glimpse. Thanks for the question, TC. Next one, no username. It says, what is special about the ship's design that allows it to travel through Antarctica? Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, the crew and their expertise. In terms of the design itself, the hull, just sort of above and below the waterline, about 2 meters either side, is extra thick. It's about 1 inch, so 2.5 centimeters thick steel. So that's really reinforced and strong, and that helps in case you do hit into any icebergs or big bits of ice. Plus, the actual shape of the hull is, the underside is a bit like the bottom of a spoon. It's slightly curved. So when you have sea ice, which is where the salt water melts, it's relatively soft. The ship can raise up above, and then it uses the weight of the ship to crush down and smash it. And so really, the ship's designed to do that. That's not a problem at all. What it then needs to do is avoid the icebergs, because they come from freshwater ice that was on land. It can often be thousands of years old, incredibly hard, like concrete. And the other thing is, because it's very windy down here, the icebergs can move quite quickly from any direction. So you've always got at least 2 people, and they're swinging floodlights around at all times to make sure that you're not missing an iceberg coming from the side rather than just ahead of you. But it's fascinating when you're up at the bridge at night time. It's like you're in the sort of, I don't know, Star Trek Enterprise or something, because at times you get this snow and ice completely bathed in front of you. You've got these big spotlights, and it's this very careful game of dodging, and I'm guessing is unkind to the captains, but basically making sure that you avoid the biggest bits. And they do have a special ice radar as well that can see in more 3D than a normal radar. So in theory, you can spot the shadowing from the bigger icebergs, because don't forget, 90% of an iceberg is below the water, so they get bigger. Okay, next question. How many layers of clothes do you wear when you're outside due to the coldness? Well, we've been, you could call it lucky, it's been unseasonably mild while we've been down here, about 0 degrees. The coldest we've had has been -4, feeling like -14 when you add in the wind chill factor, because it was a southerly breeze. It was very cold that day. What did we wear? Quite a lot. So you've got thermals, and then I had sort of a couple of layers, and then a puffer jacket, plus we've got, I'm just going to step out of shot, I'll show you 1 second here. These look like workman's jackets here, but they've got really thick insulation inside, and they're waterproof as well. So you can chuck those on top, and then these gloves, which are enormous as well, in theory can take you down to -30. But poor Mike, the cameraman, has to operate the cameras with his fingers, so he's got thinnish gloves and then like fingerless mittens over the top, but he has to stuff those hand warmers. You've ever seen them, the things that are like a tea bag you shake to keep warm? He puts those on his hand. He has about 4 on the go at all times so he can keep his hands nice and warm. How many hours of daylight are there, and does that impact the work you can do? More than I expected is the answer to that. Technical hours of daylight is about 1, and in fact the last week or so, the sun has never risen above the horizon for us. But that doesn't mean you don't get twilight. So you get this strange, it sort of starts with a sunrise and then merges straight into a sunset. So you get kind of orange into pink, and it's fantastic colours. And the other thing that's really weird I didn't expect is because you're so far south, rather than the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, it rises in like the north-northeast and sets in the north-northwest. So it looks like it's kind of rising and setting in a very similar place. Has it affected the hours we work? A bit. We've had to make sure we can do the filming in those hours of daylight, and then stuff we do in labs and other things we can do in the dark when we don't need the light. Okay, next question. What would you like the legacy of your visit to be? Well, I suppose, as I said at the beginning, I'm not here as a campaigner. I'm here as a reporter to try and say what's happening, and I just hope that people are interested and can make up their own minds based on the science that we're reporting on, and understand, excuse me, that the whole planet is connected. So even though this feels and looks a million miles from home, it's all relevant to what's happening in our lives. So if people take that lesson on, if those kids I spoke to earlier in the programme today, if one of them decides they want to go into science or making a difference, that would be a really cool thing for me. Do you get seasick? Yes, horribly, but I've been lucky so far. We came across Drake Passage, which is one of the wildest stretches of water from southern Chile to the Antarctic peninsula. It has some of the strongest currents, and because the wind can go all the way around Antarctica with nothing getting in the way, you can get waves up to 10 metres, and it is often called the polar roller or the vomit comet. But luckily it was calm when we did it on the way over. We have got to do it again in a few days. And I'm also wearing a little patch behind my ear, which in theory blocks the signal between what your eyes think's happening and what your brain thinks is happening, which is the reason why you feel sick. And so far, touch wood, I haven't been sick, but I did have to have a couple of tactical lie downs and a couple of evenings. How did you get into this field, as it's something I'm interested in as a career? In quite a roundabout way. I studied politics to start with. I've always been interested in science, but I studied politics. Thought I might want to be a lawyer, and then I went to university to do politics, and I decided that actually I really enjoyed the broadcast side of things and being a reporter. And I then got into a job with ITV. I worked as a general news reporter. I was then a weatherman for 7 years, where I sort of learned a lot more about meteorology and the connection of the world. And the whole time I've always kind of had this hankering and burning to tell science stories, because I think they're really interesting and they don't get as much coverage as they deserve. So I've sort of worked my way up. It's very much a case, if you're looking for advice, try and get your foot in the door, reach out. Everyone has had to make contacts and say, I'd love to do this. People will take a chance on you, and when you get that chance, just grab it with both hands, because it's an incredible opportunity to get to experience things like this, which don't happen every day. Can you describe a project or moment that made a significant impact on your perspective about climate change during this experience? Seeing the ice calve, which is when the front of the glacier wall, which is like the front of the frozen river of ice, falls into the ocean. Seeing even small events of that, you think, oh my goodness, the scale of this is enormous. And you look around and it looks like these small mountains nearby aren't particularly big and are quite close. Some of them are bigger than the Alps, and they're 30 kilometres away, and it just makes you realise that this place is completely vast. But in terms of the actual climate science, the main one was before we set off. I was back at British Antarctic Survey's headquarters in Cambridge talking to them, and they've got a graph, and I know graphs are boring, but this one is really, really impactful for me anyway. So one of the best ways to understand the link between carbon and temperature is to do drilling for ice cores. So the deeper you drill into the ice, the further you go down, you're basically going back in time. And what happens is, in those ice cores that they drill, like cylinders of ice, are bubbles of air that were trapped. And on this graph, they've got bubbles of air. They're able to look at, with such sensitivity, what happens in the gas. They can tell, for example, when the nuclear bomb went off. They can see that in the layer that's in the 1940s. Go back 800,000 years and they can see levels of carbon, levels of different chemicals, and also be able to work out the temperature. And this this graph perfectly plots the correlation between temperature and carbon, and it does this. And yes, temperatures have been higher in the past than they are now. But what happens is that eventually carbon then starts to go down, temperatures peter and go down the other side. What we're seeing at the moment is temperatures getting close to the warmest we've seen over the last 800,000 years, but carbon just going exponentially up. So in the last, let's say, 800,000 years, the units of carbon in the air have never been higher than 280 per million. They're currently 420, and they're predicted to get to 500 by the end of the century. So we just don't know where, if at all, that temperature curve is going to start peaking and coming back down again. It would suggest, this graph very clearly, that it is not going to slow down anytime soon. And to me, that was a really clear indication of the link between what we as humans are doing with the carbon in the atmosphere and what's happening with the climate. Where are we now? Gosh, there's loads of questions coming in. Thank you very much. Is there any invasive wildlife you've had to report on? Not that we've seen so far. They are really super duper hot about it here. So when you get off the ship, onto the ship, you have to step through buckets of sort of disinfectant to stop things. You can't take any animals. The ropes on the ships have got metal sort of barriers on, so rats can't run up the ropes when you're in dock, get onto the ship and then get onto the land, because obviously they could attack, or they could take penguin eggs and all that sorts of things. So they're really hot. I haven't seen the invasive species. Maybe there are some, but not that I've seen with my own eyes. How do we stop penguins becoming extinct? Different penguins are at different risk. The one which is at the biggest risk is the biggest penguin, which is the emperor, because they need that sea ice to breed on. And if sea ice breaks up too quickly before the chicks have hatched and can swim, that's when they get in real trouble. And that's what scientists we reported on last week are seeing, because what they're able to do is, using satellite data, they can see these incredibly remote colonies based on the staining on the ice that comes from the penguin poo. And they're seeing numbers going down even sharper than they were, or they'd modelled before. Now, in terms of what we can do about that as humans, it's really difficult, because it's the sea ice which matters. So the main thing we can do is try and cut our carbon emissions. You know, sea level rises and sea ice diminishment is probably baked in to an extent in the future, because we already have the carbon in the atmosphere. But we can control how fast that all happens. That's the main thing we can do. How do the daylight hours affect your body clock? Weirdly, not as much as I thought, actually. I've been waking up sort of at 7 o'clock most days, and it's completely dark outside. It's a bit like being in the winter in England, just a slightly more extreme version. And I guess if you're used to working in an office, you don't see much daylight in the middle of the day anyway. So yeah, not as much as I thought it would. What happens if you get stuck and you can't move in the ice? Yeah, good question. I asked that to the captain. There are options. They've got extra engines they can crank up to give us more power. Obviously, you can reverse thrust away as well. You can back yourself back out. Plus, what they can do is use the cranes. I'm not sure if you can see them over my shoulder. There's huge cranes. And they can put weights on the cranes and almost swing them to either side of the ship, which will loosen us off against the ice and move us that way. And they have various other bits of kit and tools. It's stuff they practice and stuff they take really seriously, because we are pretty isolated, so we don't want anything to go wrong. What type of animals have you seen in Antarctica? Loads of whales, lots and lots of humpback whales. We saw 115 in one day, and they were amazing all over the place. And they're a good indicator there's lots of krill in the water. We've seen loads of seals, particularly crab-eater seals, which actually don't eat crabs. Why they're named that, I'm not entirely sure. They're very cute. They look like, almost when they're swimming, they look like, you know, very smooth-moving cigars, or as they go underwater, they look more ghostly because they become sort of whiter. So they're very cool. And we've seen, my colleague Mike filmed a couple of elephant seals, which you want to avoid if you can, because they can be slightly more vicious. And then we've seen penguins as well, emperors, and some others too, which have been super cool, plus seabirds as well. Gosh, there's so many messages, they keep sprawling through. What made you want to go somewhere so cold? A combination of wanting to tell the story of what's happening here, and an adventurous streak that says, if you get the chance to go to Antarctica, why wouldn't you? It's kind of a binary thing for me. Some people think, if you say, would you go to space? It's either a yes or a no. Antarctica's kind of similar. Do you want to go to Antarctica? Half my friends said, you're away from your family for 4.5 weeks. It's going to be cold. It's a terrible decision. I've missed my family, but it's also an incredible opportunity. So I couldn't say no to that. What timeline does the world have if it doesn't change for the ice caps to melt? Yeah, good question. That's a difficult one. There is a huge amount of ice in the ice caps, and not all of it is going to melt very quickly anytime soon, fortunately. But what we're seeing is some report done by University of Durham, I think, about 3 weeks ago, and they looked at the level of sea level rises as a result of melting, both down here but also in the Arctic. And they forecast that even if we cap global warming to 1.5 degrees, which at the moment doesn't look very likely, by the end of the century we're seeing about a centimetre of ocean rise every year. Now that doesn't sound a huge amount, but scientists say at that level, that's when it becomes really hard to adapt to the changes, build sea defences, make homes more flood resistant, all that sort of stuff. So the scientists are saying really, within the lifetime of my children, certainly by the end of the century, that's when we're going to start noticing bigger differences. But all of this plays into more wild weathers. Heat waves you're seeing at the moment will become more common, droughts will become more common, wild weather. It's all changing slightly. Where are we now? Does it anger you that certain politicians in the UK try to deny climate change and its dangers to the public? Look, I am a reporter who is bound to be impartial. I think if somebody disregards what scientists are telling them and they quote science which has been disproven, that's pretty poor form for somebody who is in a position to make political decisions. There is a very different point as to what is the economic case for taking action. We know that other countries, places like China and America, are producing far more greenhouse gases than the UK. And there is a legitimate political economic argument to say, why should we take the economic pain if it's going to make a relatively small difference in the grand scheme of things? The counter argument to that is that in the long run, it is cheaper to take action now than it is to not take action with all the problems that will be baked in down the line. And secondly, if you follow the idea that because somebody else is doing something bad, you can do it as well, we'd all drop litter. We don't drop litter. We look after it. And with that in mind, even countries like the UK, if you bundle them up with other places, similar countries, Japan, Germany, France, combined, that group is 30% of the world's emissions. So we are not insignificant in that case. And actually, the emissions we make per person in the UK are still far higher than the emissions per person in China. It's just that there's so many people in China, the overall amount of emissions is much higher. What have we got next? Is climate change making the ice melt faster? Yes, that's what politicians have been telling me. Can a common person really reverse the effects of climate change? Well, I guess that's kind of what I was saying. Not on our own, no. But I was talking to Jane Goodall this morning. Those who don't know her, she was the woman famous for spending lots of time with chimpanzees. Now, she's not been to Antarctica, but she knows a lot about conservation. And what she was saying is that at the end of the day, we as humans can make decisions. We can make choices which are going to be good for the world or make choices that are going to be bad for the world. And if more people start making choices that are going to be good for the world, collectively, we can have an impact. And that's kind of all we can do. The other option is to vote for people you think might take the decisions you want them to take, and that can force change as well. Did Shackleton's crew know they were going to be rescued, or did they survive on hope? Now, I'm not a polar history expert, but it is astonishing. They kind of survived on a lot of hope. They were hoping they'd be rescued. So what happened is, the Endurance, as I understand it, their ship, got stuck in the pack ice in the Weddell Sea, got pushed along, crushed, started to sink, so they decamped off onto the ice. And then they had to wait till the ice broke up slightly. And at that stage, Shackleton and a few of his men took the lifeboats to try and sail to South Georgia, which is a sail across Drake Passage, that really rough, choppy sea I was telling you about. 720 miles to a small island with very basic navigation skills. And amazingly, they hit the islands. They then had to climb over an enormous mountain to get to a whaling station, get on a ship, go over to Chile, round up a crew, and then come back to Elephant Island to rescue the men. So it is amazing they achieved it. It is one of the greatest stories of resilience going, but I don't want to join them. I don't want to be doing anything along those lines. With rising temperatures, could your ship ever get stuck like your Fourthrunners? Yes, it could. There is still lots and lots of sea ice. We are kind of at the earlier end of the winter sea ice season. It will continue to build over the next few months. So if we weren't careful, we could easily get stuck in sea ice. But there is now more technology. There's satellite imagery of the ice and the ocean. There's radar images, that sort of stuff, better searchlights, better, stronger ships. So fingers crossed it won't happen. But can it happen? Yeah, absolutely it can. How does it feel to be in such a remote location? Really privileged and really surreal. I sort of wake up and every now and then Mike and I, the cameraman, glance out the window and go, oh look, it's an iceberg floating past the window. It's really amazing. And we're really lucky as well. 2-3 years ago, communications have been really difficult. But now you've got Starlink, the sort of Elon Musk system. I can do WhatsApp video calls back home and chat to people, chat to colleagues. You know, I can hear you now. It's completely different in that sense. So that's really helped. But you know, I will be ready to go home and see the family. For people that we've left behind on the station down there, there's a team of 40 or 40 odd. They're going to be there for 4 months. No more fresh food, no other people. That's it. They are on their own. They've got a small hospital down there. They've basically got a miniature city that they are running, but they are completely isolated. That might appeal to you. For me, I think it would be a bit much, but it's really cool being down here. Just a couple of questions left by the looks of things. If all went wrong, how long could you last out there? Worst case scenario, no one comes to get you. Oh, thanks. It's taking a downhill turn. There is safety equipment on the ship to survive for 20 days in tents on the ice. So they've got like really high quality puffer jackets, sleeping bags, tents that they hope will never be used, like hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of kit in a cupboard that they hope will never ever be used, which is crazy. So the short answer is 20 days. The long answer is, I guess we try and be resilient and work things out. I was slightly horrified to see in one of the bags, you may have seen on the programme tonight, there's an ice knife that you can use to kind of carve blocks to make things like igloos. It did look like something that people would use for cannibalism if stuck on the ice for too long. And there was a famous polar story, again, not in the Antarctic, but the Arctic, 2 ships called Erebus and Terror. And they got stuck in the ice. And looking at the remains of people who died there are saw marks on the bones. So the thought are that they did turn to cannibalism and ate themselves. So the question is, who would be eaten first? And I wouldn't be much use, so I suspect they'd eat me first because I have no technical skills. Right. Oh no, that was the last question. There we go. That's it. Thank you so much for your questions. Really appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed the coverage and hope that I've shown you just how cool this place is and how important as well. So thanks very much, and we'll be back on air tomorrow. Bye-bye.